My name is Brianna, and welcome to my channel. Oh my god, Mystique, no, why? And for me, September isn't like strictly spooky and it's not strictly summer. It's kind of in between. It's really cozy for me. And so a lot of the books I read this month were cozy mysteries. Real Murders, by the first book of the Aurora Tea Garden Mysteries by Charlene Harris. And I gotta say, it was kind of a letdown. This was a brand new series for me, and I just didn't feel like I connected to the book. It is set in Lawrencetown, Georgia, and in the book, in like the first chapter, it's kind of described as like a growing commuters town to Atlanta. Um, and in this book, particularly, which I really did like, and this is what intrigued me, was a group of people. Yes, baby girl. Um, there's a group of people who really enjoy analyzing and Yes. No, you can't go to the plants. So what really intrigued me was that there is a group of crime junkies that get together and discuss real murders and mysteries that have happened. And they're usually infamous, but some of them are more famous. So within the first chapter two, the first murder victim is discovered by the main character, Aurora Teagarden. And she is one of the town librarians and seems to really enjoy her job. But um, the one thing about this crime, she notices and tells the police officer who first finds the victim, is that it seems to be a very staged murder. Staged in the fact that um, it was like a copycat, or she thought it was a copycat of another murder, actually the one that she was supposed to present that night at the Real Murders kind of like club. And so um, that kind of is the premise for this book. I found this book to be a very flat book. I thought because of the librarian Aurora, she was going to have more of like a bookish appeal, or she'd be like, we'd find her reading. But really, her whole personality was real murders. There was nothing really substantial I found to her, and so I just found her character really boring, and also her friends and everybody else in the kind of the cast. I really didn't have a huge desire to continue with this series, which is a real shame because again, I thought the premise of a crime junkie um, murder mystery solving analyzing group was kind of an interesting thing. And so I have to say I finished it, but I'm not going to be continuing this series. The book that I read this month was Death at First Sight by Lena Gregory, and it is also a first book in a cozy mystery series, and that is the Bay Island Psychic Mystery Murders series. And this felt even flatter for me than the last book. So I literally considered DNFing it. I just felt like I was trudging my way through it. There was no way I was gonna give it like more than maybe a 2 kind of thing. So this town is set in Bay Island, New York, and again, this is complete with a lighthouse. But I honestly, like how I said, I like to feel welcomed into the world. I like to feel kind of like cozied in with the characters. But honestly, not only did I feel not welcomed to the town when I read it, but when I met the characters, I didn't feel welcomed either. Now this could be because the main character, Cass Donovan, who we are kind of like following, has just returned to Bay Island, and she is not being welcomed. But again, I feel like even though that is a possibility, it didn't register, like it didn't feel like the reader was being welcomed into the world. And all the characters, again, felt quite flat. The next series I want to talk to you, and yes, I said series because I read more than one book of it, In fact, I binge read the first, second, and third books of the Tourist Trap Mysteries by Lynn Cahoon. And so that is Guidebook to Murder, Mission to Murder, and If the Shoe Kills. Now, I found all these books really well written. The characters were completely fleshed out. You saw the friendships and the relationships really well from even the first book. So the first book is called Guidebook to Murder, and it is set in a bookshop. The main character, Jill, Jill Gardner, is the proprietor of this bookshop, and it's a combo bookshop and coffee house. So you know it's gonna be rare. And one of the reviews from another author, Susan McBride, says, and this is what really hooked me, honestly, and it fulfills it. Like, this review summarizes and fulfills this entire first book really, really well, so I want to read it to you. Murder, dirty politics, pirate lore, and a hot police detective. A cozy lover's dream come true. And so, honestly, I really enjoyed this series. I have definitely read first 3 books. The world building was immaculate. We learn about the relationship between Jill and her aunt and how that's going to proceed with the bookstore. And I just really like them. They're feel-good books. So they're not going to be mind-blowing. They're not going to feel like, oh my god, this is the best thing I've read since lunch. But they're going to give you that sense of warm and cozy and all the feels. And so all 3 books that I have read this month by Lynn Cahoon, that is Guidebook to Murder, Mission to Murder, and If the Shoe Kills, were all rated a 3.5 for me, which is a really good rating. And if I were to rate any higher, it'd probably even be a borderline almost 4 stars. But they're really good, they're cozy, and probably, if I have to say, they're probably one of my top mystery series of the year. Now, this month I read one nonfiction book, I Got a Monster, The Rise and Fall of America's Most Corrupt Police Squad, by Brandon Soderbergh. Now, about a police unit from Baltimore, and that had been terrorizing the city for about half a decade. This is just about the police procedural and the court case, that essentially took them down. And so we kind of see and we read from some of the cops that were kind of involved, that they were involved, about what they would do. All I can say is that it was good. It was interesting to see kind of what happened in this case. I ultimately found the writing, it was immersive, but it was also boring by the end, and it just felt very repetitive. So as I'm thinking about this, I might even decrease that a little bit to a 3.75 and not a complete 4 in the end. So I read Young Elites this month. We fall into the world of the Dagger Society and Adelina Mortu. This book gave me so many mixed feelings. First of all, it took me literally forever to read. It took me almost over a month to read this, and honestly, this was probably due to the characters, rather than the plot, since whenever the plot moved, it literally just, like, I got washed away with the plot. It was fantastic. Even though I didn't really connect with the characters in the first book, I think because I definitely can see growth in them, that I'm gonna connect and like them more in the Rose Society, which is the second book in the Young Elites series. Now, because I saw growth in Adelina, and as the book progressed, though it was very slow until the very end, which is where I think she's about to have a really big growth spurt between now and the Rose Society. So I am looking forward to this next book. I also really enjoyed the world and how it was fleshed out. I could really visualize it. I could visualize the marketplace and the castles where the Inquisitioners are, and I could really get behind the excitement in the crowds when we were at the horse races, for example, and Lady Gemma was racing. As um, just really see the physical markings and descriptions of the what happened to everybody who was affected by the blood fever. And so I found those really compelling. I liked the writing. Mary Lou did a fantastic job, but I can't say Young Elites was my favorite book. So I will be probably reading The Rose Society later on, and hopefully I'll finish it, and The Midnight Star, I think, whatever the third book is, by the end of the year. The next book I want to talk to you about is Him Standing by Richard Wagamis. Now this is about a boy named Lucas Smoke who has been taught by his grandfather the Ojibwe art of wood carving, and he is unnatural at it. So much so that he's able to actually make people really come to life, and his reputation for this really starts spreading. And so that's when we meet a stranger who comes to him and is asking him to make a very specific carving of a mask, which Lucas has never done before, and so he is kind of like hesitant about it, but the stranger offers him a lot of money for it. And so this book is about Lucas growing not only in his talents, but really learning about some of the Ojibwe traditions. And so he has to kind of he actually does travel in his dreams and to find the inner to find the inspiration for this mask carving. And as he does, his life becomes really dark and more disturbing, and so he has to really figure out his way in this and what he has to do to overcome the darkness that is facing him because of this mask. And so over time, as we find out, he is going up against a very powerful and dark shaman, and so who ends up being a sorcerer. This mask is going to allow the sorcerer to come from the dream world into their reality. And so Lucas has to make the decision whether he's going to allow this to happen, or is he going to stop it. And it's really interesting. It talks really about more than just the sorcery and magic and dreams, but really goes into rediscovering his Ojibwe culture and heritage. And I found it just a really good book. Okay, so the next book I want to talk to you is one I read as an audiobook. It's called The Shadows by Alex North, and I know Alex North has a really good reputation as an author. His books are really considered to be really good, but honestly, and maybe this is simply because I read it as an audiobook, I couldn't get into The Shadows. Now, this seemed to be really something up my alley. We have a murder and a strange entity and dreams, and really, it sounded really, really good. But when I read it, I listened to it, I couldn't get into it. And maybe it's just the audiobook, because it lost me. It felt like I was listening to a hazy fever dream, and I couldn't get into it. I felt confused, and again, it was probably because I listened to this as an audiobook rather than just reading it on my own. I'll be probably reading another book of his in the future, but right now, The Shadows was just not my cup of tea. And one of my favorite books was From Below by Darcy Coates. And this book was amazing. It was so good. The atmosphere, the world building, the characters, everything really fleshed out. I felt like I was going to be trapped underwater at some points. So this was probably one of the most unique horror books I've read in a while. And so definitely recommend picking this up if you can. It is a really new release. Actually, this year is a 2022 release, It does take place underwater, and if you are somebody who can feel claustrophobic, this might not be the book for you. But that is like up to you if you want to try reading it. But honestly, felt so good. The psychological terror that you feel, like the whole enchilada, it goes back between two like historical timelines. So right now, one of them is literally 2000s. It's like brand new, all the references, everything, because they're diving on a ship that was sailing one of her voyages in 1928, and it sinks, and they don't know why. And so this boat has been a real mystery since it went down, and that's where the majority of this story takes place. But it is so good, and I can't wait to rejoin this world and continue on reading Miss Coates' work, which I did, because the next book I read, well, it was more of a novella, and I read it. It's called Messages from the Dead, and I actually haven't read any of the other series, but I saw it online and I thought it was really good. Again, 5 stars, atmospheric, the plot, everything moves swiftly, characters, even though I didn't really know them because I haven't read any of their series, they felt really fleshed out, real. They felt like I was interacting with other people. This is actually a reread for me, and that was Max Brooks's Devolution or De-Evolution. So this is another horror book. You can see as September went on, I went from cozy mysteries to more thriller, chiller, and then really into the horror by the end of it. And that's how my September really goes. And so this book is basically what would happen if this book is basically Max Brooks's answer to what would happen if Mount Rainier blew up and there was a small eco-town on its mountainside, and what would happen to the residents who no longer have access to Wi-Fi and internet, like all the essentials that we use today. They weren't able to escape. What would happen if they couldn't access their food orders, like fresh food orders that were being flown in, etc. And it's a really compelling book. And just to add to the dangers of what happens if they are encountered by a family of Sasquatch, and how they need to understand that now that Mount Rainier has exploded, they are no longer the top of the food chain. And now their whole world and the environment has changed, and how they need to accept and change themselves in order to fit into their new ecosystem with a new top predator. It was really gory. I really enjoyed it, but I really enjoyed the concept of having what would happen if Sasquatch interrupted, human living after a volcano erupts. Next book I want to talk to you, and the final book of this list, is Taktomi, an Arctic horror and stories anthology. Now, this had everything from straight body horror to dystopian post-apocalyptic. We had zombies, we had everything in between, and I loved it. And this book was so good that at one point at the very end of the story, when the final sentence hit, I actually gasped, and my husband asked me what was wrong. I took my time with this. It's again a collection of short stories, and I took my time with it because I really loved each and every world that the authors created for their individual stories. And so, yeah, go and get yourself a copy of this one because it is so good. Now, that's the end of my September wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that there was something on this list that you are kind of interested in. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye! Hey kid, don't
never let them get inside your head. They'll tell you what to do in life instead of everything you know that you could get.